So when you look at this, I don't see any obvious epidermis. You get a really dense and diffuse infiltrate filling up all of, looks like deep dermal and then, subcutaneous tissue because it's all interspersed in the fat. So at scan, you do see a lot of pale, so you know that there are histiocytes in there. So at least lymphocytes and histiocytes. And so, some extravasated reds, lymphocytes, histiocytes, probably some, I would bet, Newton eos probably makes infiltrate. Oh, sorry. Are you in now? Okay. So this power, you can see all the eos. So you got tons of newts, tons of eos, tons of lymphocytes, tons of histiocytes, and you have some frank necrosis here, right? It's kind of that pink degenerating material. So lots of necrosis and this mixed dense and diffuse infiltrate, and you should be thinking infection, especially when there are that number of newts. And here the organisms are pretty obvious, right? So this one's nice to give you an idea of size if you're confused about the organism, because sometimes they're not quite this obvious. So with cocci, it's quite a bit bigger than the surrounding lymphocyte nuclei, right? Versus, blasto is going to be bigger than them also, but only marginally bigger. And then histo is tiny, leash is tiny. And rhinosporidiosis is huge. So this gives you a good idea of the size of coccidiomycosis. And we'll just look around. So you can see there's some degenerating forms. Let's go on higher power and look at them. So, and sometimes you can see them when they're full, like those guys kind of in the center of the field there. See, they're full of all the little endospores. So they look a little different than the ones that are not full of spores. But all the same thing. Some of those little smaller ones are just degenerating.
Okay, those are little
Or they could be little endospores that are released. But this one really gives you a nice example of how the spectrum of what they can look like. Okay. So that was cocci. Alright. So this one, when you're looking at scan, you're thinking, okay, this looks like normal skin, right? So you're in the normal skin differential. So, you want to go in, look in the stratum corneum, you want to look at, if you don't see anything abnormal there, look at the basal layer, look for absence of melanocytes, vitiligo, look for mast cells, your basic differential of normal skin. And then when you're looking at the cornified layer and the differential of normal skin, make sure your cornified layer is normal because ichthyosis is in that differential, and as is tinea. So this one, Dr. Ellison likes to talk about the kind of wafer-like scale that sort of flakes off. So this one kind of has it. You can see the scale is, it's really normal kind of basket weave orthokeratosis. There's no really compact sort of hyperkeratosis or layered horn like you usually see in dermatophyte. But this thing is on. Let me just. Let's see. Yes. All right. So you can start to make out kind of a little organism there, and then here's some little rounded meatballs, if you will, and then you're starting to get some ziti. There's some more little meatballs. See if there's a better section. Yeah. So you see there, you got a little kind of stumpy hyphae there. Stumpy hyphae, and then and then some little meatballs. So the ziti and meatballs is good for tinea versicolor, right? So tinea versicolor is normally going to have a more ortho basket weave keratotic horn, and this kind of wafer-like scale that's kind of floating off. So that one was TB. So this one does have epidermis. You got compact orthohyperkeratosis, acanthosis of the epidermis, but obviously your eye is drawn below that. You have what looks like a central ulceration, and then beneath that you have this, again, dense and diffuse infiltrate. But this one, the etiology is a little bit more obvious. In the middle of each of these large lobules of inflammation, you have these kind of foreign structures. This is one that you should, pick up at scan, that this is a mycetoma, right? So mycetomas, you can have eumycotic mycetomas due to fungal organisms. You can have actinomycotic mycetomas due to the actinomyces. And they talk about, when you go in higher power, you should be able to look and help distinguish. So normally the fungal ones are going to have more kind of club-shaped hyphae at the edge. This one to me looks fungal. Club shape, versus when you're dealing with the bacterial etiology, it's more the filamentous bacterial. But there's always going to be a ton of newts around these. Basically, the granules get extravasated through the epi, and you can a lot of times identify based on the color, right? Like there are red ones, yellow ones, white ones, black ones. The black ones are most characteristic of the eumycotic mycetomas. So anyway, this is a mycetoma. It's more of a scan kind of diagnosis.
Is it worth knowing which ones cause which colored grains?
I think...
I know there's like a chart and chain or something.
Yeah, I think it's good to know the most common ones. And then the red one, which is the pelletiary. I always remember colorful palette. Okay. I remember that one. Okay, so when you're looking at this one, there is a little bit of epi at the top, compact ortho, kind of hyperkeratosis, maybe a little bit of PEH, and then you can see at this level that you have a ton of these kind of Langhans type giant cells where the nuclei are arranged around the periphery like that. So we got a ton of giant cells. We have a mixed infiltrate, right? It's kind of clear looking, so it's not all lymphocytic. There are histiocytes in there. And then you have all these kind of larger clear spaces. You can make out all the giant cells. Giant cell, giant cell, giant cell, giant cell. And then all these clear spaces. So like Dr. Elson talks about, go in and see what's in the clear spaces, right? So when you're looking at these organisms in contrast to the coccidiomycosis, you can see that these guys are, first of all, they're variable in shape, right? I mean, in size. So some are a little bit smaller, some are a little bit bigger. Like, there we go. That guy's pretty tiny. He's about the same size as lymphocytes. That guy's a little bit bigger. These guys are a little bit bigger, and they're right next to ones that are tiny. So you've got this variation in size. And these organisms that maybe have a little bit of a cell wall, but not much. It's definitely not thick and refractile like blasto. And these guys don't have a little halo around them, and they're too big to be histo, right? So this is good for crypto. So crypto can be hard to pick out sometimes, I think, but if you really look around, there's a lot of variation in the size of them. And they don't have, a wall like blasto. I think probably the hardest thing to distinguish from this is the African histoplasmosis, which you'll see later. But that you would be less likely to get. Alright. So in this one, you don't even need to go in higher power. So you can see that compact orthohyperkeratosis, almost like a little bit of stratum lucidum on foraminacral skin. You have some, a little bit of acanthosis, maybe bordering on to be PEH, and then centrally you have something that looks similar to that other mycetoma that we saw, but there's pigment around the edge, right? So this is a pigmented granule in a mycetoma, which means it's most likely eumycotic mycetoma. Most of the black granules are going to be fungus. This one's kind of cool because it shows that you've got like a little channel in the epi there. And stage is like super sticky. Yeah, so you can see it being eliminated basically, which you know that the granules get eliminated, so you can start to see the little track there, and then it really comes up there where this little granule is being eliminated by transepidermal elimination. So pigmented mycetoma. So when I'm looking at this one, again, the dermis looks pretty normal, but the stratum corneum is really thick. You've got really kind of compact orthohyperkeratosis. You wonder again, if we're on acral skin, this one doesn't really have a great stratum lucidum. But centrally to me, I'm picking up some pigment. So it's like, okay, is that just junk? Is that ink? What is that? Well, no, the ink they use is green. You can still see some of the pigment in there. So go in and look on higher power to see what it is. And it's fungus. I don't know why this thing is not parfable for me every time I change it. So little short, stumpy, pigmented hyphae, and cut and cross section here. So you're on probably acral skin, like we talked about, and you've got these pigmented fungi living in the cornified layer, so that's good for tinea nigra. And find one that's not got a bubble on it. Okay. So when you're looking at this one, I think it's cut a little weird, but you can still appreciate, cut a little tangentially, but you can still appreciate that there's PEH with pus in this one, right? So pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia, and you got these pockets of neutrophils and giant cells. You can start to make out some of the giant cells. So when you see that, that's his here come big green leafy vegetables. So halogenoderma, chromo, blasto, granulum inguinale, leash, and then P. vegetans. So you want to look around and see, we're in the fungal chapter obviously, so look around and see if you can see any organisms. And leash is usually pretty clear. If you go in high power, they're usually pretty obvious. Same thing, chromo, that they really jump out at you because of the pigment. So if you're looking around in a pH with pus differential and you're having trouble finding an organism, then there's a good chance on an exam that it's blasto, if you run out of time. To me, looking, I'm like, okay, there either is something in that macrophage or there was something in that macrophage, and we're not cutting through it in this section, so that's a little suspicious. And it's a good size for blasto. It's hard to move this thing without it being blurry because the stage is so sticky. So in the macrophages is a good place to look, and then in the collections of neutrophils, the little abscesses is another good place to look. So that looks suspicious to me. Like, okay, what is that? It's go look on higher power. Yeah, so I think that macrophage is eating an organism. We're just not getting a good cross section of it. That is a much better one. So see how, let me see if I can move it up and down. See how the wall looks kind of refractile when you move it up and down? So it's got that little, doubly refractile wall. And then size-wise, right, in comparison to what we've been looking at, this one's quite a bit smaller than the cocci. It's basically, bigger than the lymphocyte nuclei, but only marginally bigger, and it has that thick wall that distinguishes it from the crypto that we saw. So this is blasto. And don't count on finding a broad-based bud. I imagine if you had ample time, you could look around and find one, but on a test you're not. So, like, there's another one there. Right, see the wall. There's some more in that macrophage. I think it's rare that you see that many. Okay, so that one's last time. So, not seeing any epi. We have this, big chunk of tissue. Looks like it's deep. You can see fat kind of scattered around there. You can see little kind of foci of lymphocytes around the edge there. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of necrosis. This all looks dead to me. So to me, anytime I see necrosis, I would want to look for an angioinvasive fungus, like the, like Zygomyces or Aspergillus. Okay, so let's go look and see what we find. Alright, so lots of death. It looks like on the edge of the death. Let's see what we see. Alright, so look in the center of the field. That should catch your eye. Like, there's something in those histiocytes, right? What are all those little dots? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of little tiny organisms, right, inside the histiocytes. Okay, so let's look around a little bit more. So when you see the tiny little organisms like that, your differential is primarily, is it leash, is it histo? And if you're thinking histo, you have to also consider, penicillium. Penicillium, sometimes you should be able to see kind of hyphal forms, but it can look very similar. Okay, so let's go look at those on higher power. That lens is sorry, it's not incredibly focused. Okay, so do you see how, and compared to the leash that we looked at before, look at this little guy. He has kind of like a little white space around him. That one has a little white space, that one has a little white space. So they have this pseudo-capsule, right? They don't have a true capsule, but the way they get processed in tissue sections, they have a pseudo-capsule. So that's one clue. Another clue is they're really kind of filling the cytoplasm, as opposed to, leash likes to line up around the edge. histo is really kind of scattered throughout the cytoplasm of the macrophage. So this is histo. So we're down in sub-Q again. You can see there are a lot of histiocytes here. Areas of necrosis. Okay, so let me do this on scanning mag. I think you can see it better. So when you're looking around, in the deep tissue here, to me this looks like like a cystic structure, right? So there's either maybe something here filling this cyst, but you can see there's this kind of fibrous sort of capsule around it, which you can see a lot of times just around, like EI or follicular cysts that people have like messed with over time. You get that kind of surrounding fibrosis, but in this one, on the inner aspect of it, you have granulomatous type, right? There's a giant cell. So you have a cystic structure, and you have these, little lance type giant cells and mixed infiltrate surrounding it. So that makes me wonder, did this person have like a splinter or something and then got walled off with a cystic structure? It's a good idea to go in and look for organisms. Because you also, as you know, you can get a dermatiaceous fungi can cause phaeomycotic cyst. Okay, so there's a little bit of brown there, a little bit of brown there. Figure out, is it just hemosiderin? Is it organism? What is it? More, see that brown there. Let's go in and look. Oh, sorry. Okay, so that's not hemosiderin, right? That's a fungus. See the little hyphal structure? Got the pigment. See them there? So you want to look around a little bit, because if you get these cut in cross section, it can look like chromomycosis. But when you have the pigmented hyphae, then it's more one of the dermatiaceous hyphal form fungi. So, and with the cystic structure, this is a phaeomycotic cyst, right? Phaeomycosis has the pigmented hyphal forms. It's like if you just had that cut in a cross section, you could be a little bit confused. There's some more. Some more. Anyway, you get the point. So that one's a phaeomycotic cyst. So this one, to me, looks like a nice example of acral skin, right? You have really compact orthohyperkeratosis, and I'm trying to lucidum over it. And your pathology is centered here. My eye is drawn to that pigmented structure there. There are a bunch of giant cells in there. So in contrast to the one that we just saw, right, these, are only the little round structure, yeasty structures, and not hyphal. This is chromomycosis. And ideally you'd want to see one with a little septation. So that one kind of has them. That little guy. So lots of fragments of tissue with necrosis. I'm seeing a lot of necrosis. So again, for me, when I see necrosis, I think, okay, I want to make sure I'm not missing an angio-invasive fungus. So this person was riddled with them, right? You see them even at this power. Okay. So you want to look around for a little while and not just see one, boom, next case, because aspergillus, like I think Justin mentioned last week, when the hyphae are degenerating after aspergillus has died, they can get swollen and they can look like mucor. So in this one, you have these broad, kind of ribbon-like hyphae, right? And when you look at them, you don't see any septations. And classically, they're going to branch at right angles as opposed to the like aspergillus and the hyalomycoses, because they're going to branch more 45 degrees and have septations. But nothing ever follows the rules exactly. And they can be a little bit tricky when you get them cut in cross section. Let me see if I can find an area with more. Like sometimes if you just have them cut in cross section, like that guy or that guy, you could be confused. Be like, is that blasto? What is that? So you want to look around, but you can usually find them not in cross section. This is a good example of a big, thick ribbon-like hyphae. No septations. There's a nice 90-degree branching there on that guy. So yeah, this is one of the zygomycetes. So this one, again, there's a lot of, I think the dirt is getting in focus more in the slide. There we go. There's something that draws your eyes, right? And the vessels are occluded. All of these vessels are plugged up. So again, I'm wondering, like, what's going on? Is there something in the vessels? Is there something causing the vessels to be occluded? And here the answer is yes, right? To me, I'm like, okay, what are all these things that are cut in cross section here? Let's keep looking. And so now you're starting to see that there's a lot of death here, but you can still make out, these little hyphal forms here, right? So again, you want to look around, because to me, I'm looking at that, I'm like, are there any septations in that? Is this mucor? So that guy's got septations, right? Not mucor. Let's find some more. So see how it gets confusing? Because where these have died, they look ribbon-like, right? That's why you want to look around. Same thing with these. This is all, all of this is dead tissue. So. Some in cross section. Let's look at another piece.
In the crust, there's a bunch of septate ones. Can you collapse a little more?
Yeah, there's some. these guys. There's some in the tissue too on this side. I just gotta find another cut. Yeah. So these are nice examples, right? In contrast to the dematiaceous fungi, you have the hylohyphomycoses, and aspergillus is one of them. Fusarium is one of them. Basically all the non-pigmented, branching invasive fungi. So this one's got nice septations. It's not pigmented. So you're wondering, about one of the hylohyphomycoses, and this one happens to be aspergillus. Like we mentioned, look at it in that vessel. I mean, it's filling up the vessel, kind of destroying the vessel in the angioinvasive fungi. So this, to me, this is really impressive papillary dermal edema. I mean, you're like, okay, is this sweet? Is this like a really robust, like PMLE? Is this an arthropod assault? What's going on here? You got an ulceration of the epidermis there, so you're really kind of looking around, and then we also have newts underneath the cornum, right? So we've got these little subcorneal pustules, and we've got the papillary dermal edema. So that should make you really concerned for tinea, right? Because it's in both of those differentials. Could it still be arthropod? Maybe one that got secondarily infected, I guess. But then, if you look here, this also has a layered horn, right? You got compact, orthohyperkeratosis, and then regular vasculitis on top of that. So we got a layered horn, we got all this papillary dermal edema, we got newts in the cornified layer, so you should definitely want to go in and look for tinea. Okay, so there's some in cross section. See that little guy, that little guy, that little guy. Those to me look like fungi in cross section, and then there's a whole little colony of them right there. Let's see if we can find some that are lengthwise. I think they're harder to find in the pus, personally. I think they're easier to find in the layered horn. It's just like junk. There's some. To me, I think that little area stuck in the space there is a fungus. Let's see. I think that probably is too, but it's not great. I'm going to find them to show you, because I feel like when I was a resident, I was always like, what are they talking about? I don't see the fungus. Where did our piece of tissue go? There's some. I think they're not Great. I should have brought, we had a case that came in. Yeah, this is the one I was showing you on lower power, right? We were looking on lower power. This is just that same area on higher power. This is the little colony of them. Here, kind of cross section. We had a case that came in on Friday as the patient was erythrodermic, like CTCL versus psoriasis, and it is the most impressive tinea I've ever seen. So I should have brought that to show you guys. This is a double side, so it's gonna be super out of focus. Just as FYI. For a second. Okay. So this one, to me, it's got some mounds of para, and this kind of scale crust, a little bit of spongiosis, and that kind of superficial perivascular infiltrate. This one, I would also be thinking tinea when I look for it. Like compact orthohyperkeratosis there, so let's go look and see. I think sometimes if you don't have time on a test, it can be more pattern recognition when you have the kind of compact orthohyperkeratosis underneath the granular layer and that little bit of sponge. Let's go one higher. What about, I think, here? Cross section, maybe a little bit of a hyphae. That one there, right? Look at this guy. Yeah. So those are all little cross sections. So this is tinea. And then we're going to go back out of the double planed. This is a normal slide, so it's going to be out of focus for a second. Okay. So this is a PAS stain, right? You got all senum and sign out. So your fungus is going to be magenta colored. There's one area that has a bunch, so I'm going to try to find it for you. This one got folded over.
That one.
Yeah. This side is super dirty also. So you see the little hyphal forms all through here. And some cutting cross section. So a lot of times when you get the PAS, you want to look in the grunge, like the junk that somebody scraped from under the nail, because they're much more likely to do that than in the actual toenail. So this one is not human skin, so I've seen this before in one of our other unknown boxes, but the skeletal muscle is like super high up. There's fat above that. Look at all these follicles. I think this one is from a monkey, he said, but anyway. So lots of, multinucleated giant cells, kind of mixed infiltrate. Basically the same as all the other infections we've been looking at, right? Just to get in your brain that when you see that, you should look for something infectious. Okay, so you can see how this one, could be confused with crypto, right? Because you can see all these little organisms they're kind of similarly sized to crypto. They're really diffuse, kind of scattered all over, but if you go in and look at higher power, they have a wall that looks a little different to my eye than the crypto that we were looking at. I think you're probably unlikely to see this on a test unless you're a fellow. This is the African histo, which is bigger than regular histo. Okay, so all that dirt. The dirt out of focus. So this one you've got pseudothelioma, hyperplasia. You've got these little collections of multinucleated giant cells. Okay, so I'm seeing a bunch of little organisms again. Do you guys see them? All these little dots. Lots of little dots. So go in and see what the little dots are. So, and this is not an HME. This is some kind of fungus thing. Probably a PAS. Anyway, see, similar to what we saw before, you got the little kind of pseudo capsule around them, and they're stuffing the macrophages, so this is histo again.
What's that? Which pseudo ones?
Histo.
Histo.
I guess this is all of that. Okay, so you can see that there's organism here, right? That doesn't belong. The question is that cross-section of an organism? Let's look on higher power. Voila! So these are the little soccer balls, right? Little morula. That's what they call them. So to me they look like soccer balls. So these are not fungi, these are algae. So this is protothecosis. So these are really nice examples there. And these that are a little bit lighter color, and they're just degenerating. This is another double slide. So, I'm not going to waste much time on this one because the organisms are impossible to find. This is sporo. So when you have something that you think should be an infection, you can't find organisms, think of sporo. Look at the history. This one, the slide says it was a lymphangitic nodule. So so in your differential diagnosis of things that spread up the arm, sporo's on there, as are a number of other things. But you can look for the little. They'll get a Splendori Hapu phenomenon around the organisms. So it looks like a little starburst if you see them in tissue, but they're really hard to find. You're better off using special stains. But you can tell that this is infectious, right? And see the granular. That one was sporo. Coming back out of the double plane side. I see a lot of organisms. in here. Here. These little guys. I think this is a PAS stain of, right, this looks similar to the aspergillus we saw before, right? The chains with a little septation. This one's just stained with the PAS. So this again is, one of your hylohypomycoses, and you've got clotted off vessels. So an angiotropic one, so good chance it's aspergillus, right? You guys can see them, right? The little fungi. I can go right up. Right. So cross sections of them. And then seeing the hyphae. There's a really good one. So we've got some kind of PEH going on. You guys stop me if you see organisms because we're running short on time. Oh yeah, there we go. Looking in the wrong spot. Okay. So, you got a long kind of hyphal form. I think this can be really difficult to distinguish from TV, which is why I'm pointing this out. So that the TV to me has the short kind of ZD-like hyphae versus this one has longer hyphae and little meatball-like structure, so that's better for Candida. Some people are like, oh, Candida goes up and down, and that's helpful. I don't find that helpful. I think if you have something that looks like spaghetti and meatballs when the ZD is short and fat, then you have the wafer-like scale, it's more like TV, and when it's more like long spaghetti, then it's more likely Candida. Another double slide, so it's going to be super out of focus. And super dirty, apparently. This one has the same history on it as the other Sporo. So this is just a stain to pick out the organisms, right? You can see in the magenta color all through there. So it's the one that should have some cigar-shaped, that's what they call them, organisms. To me, this is more of like a, you have the history, and then the patient has some mixed infections, you can't find the organism, and you stain it, and then culture it. That is Sporo too. Going back from the double slide, so give me a second. And super dirty still. I think structures here, here. This looks like another hylohyphomycosis. Yeah. See, I'm like, it's probably Aspergillus again. See that guy there? That guy. But they should kind of catch your eye at lower power, even though they're not really super diagnostic or anything. Almost done. So yay, an easy one. Right, so these are giant. So when you look at them, some of the smaller ones, it might remind you of the cocci that we saw first. But these things are huge, right? Look at the ones that are sporulating, and they're giant. So this is rhinosporidiosis, which is now, it's not a fungus, but it's still covered in the fungal sector. So this one's got a lot of fibrosis. Okay, similar to the mycetoma that we saw before, it's got this kind of walled off little nodules, but then here, this one looks different than the other one that we saw, right? And then in terms of the grain that's at the center of it.
That's good.
And then if you go at higher power on this one, see how you can make out the little bacteria in there? The fine little kind of filamentous bacteria. So this is a actinomyces, or actinomycotic mycetoma. So that's it.